Hello there, welcome to this peaceful evening space we share together. Before we begin tonight's journey into mystery, I want to check in with you. How are you feeling as this day comes to a close? Whatever emotions you're carrying, whether it's curiosity about the unknown, perhaps a little fatigue from the day, or maybe just that perfect readiness to settle into something intriguing yet calming. All of these feelings are welcome here. Tonight, we're going to explore a story that sits at the edge of reality, a gentle mystery that unfolded on a warm summer night in Kentucky back in 1955. This is not a story meant to frighten, but rather to wonder, to drift, to let your mind settle into the rhythm of a tale that has puzzled people for nearly 70 years. As we journey together through this story, you might notice your thoughts wandering. That's perfectly natural. If at any point your mind drifts away from our tale, simply let it, and when you're ready, gently return to the farmhouse in Hopkinsville, where something extraordinary was about to unfold. Take a moment to settle into your space. Feel your body being supported, like sitting on an old porch swing on a warm summer evening. Let yourself sink deeper into comfort, and know that for the next hour and a half, you can simply listen and let this story carry you wherever you need to go. Chapter 1. The Sky Falls Quiet. You ever stand outside in the dark and feel like the sky's too close? August 21st, 1955, Christian County, Kentucky. Picture this, if you will, a hot night, heavy with bugs and breath, the kind of summer evening that wraps around you like a warm blanket, where the air itself seems to hold stories, where porch screens cling to your back with humidity, and something in the woods doesn't quite sound right. The cicadas are singing their eternal summer song, a sound that has remained unchanged for millions of years, rising and falling in waves across the countryside. If you listen closely, you can almost hear them now, that steady, hypnotic rhythm that makes time feel slower, softer, more peaceful. In the distance, a train whistle echoes across the farmland, carrying its lonely song through the valleys and tobacco fields of Christian County. It's the kind of sound that makes you feel both connected to the world and somehow separate from it, floating in your own little bubble of time and space. "11 people crowded into a farmhouse on the outskirts of Hopkinsville that night. The Sutton family, friends, children, tired after a long dinner on this sweltering evening. They weren't drunk. They weren't looking for trouble. They were just ordinary people, living an ordinary life, in what they thought was an ordinary place. The farmhouse itself was nothing special. White clapboard siding weathered by decades of Kentucky seasons, a front porch that creaked in all the right places, windows that caught the breeze just so. It was the kind of house where 3 generations might gather, where stories were told and retold, where the rhythms of rural life played out in slow, peaceful measures. Inside, the children were growing sleepy. The adults sat in worn chairs, talking in the soft voices that summer evenings inspire. Someone might have been mending something, another person reading by lamplight. The radio played softly in the background, maybe country music, maybe news from Louisville, the kind of gentle soundtrack that makes a house feel like home. But before this night was over, they'd fired dozens of rounds at something that didn't bleed, and long after the lights came back on, they'd keep telling the same story, a story so strange, so persistent, that it would outlive most of the people who witnessed it. Something small with glowing eyes and spindly arms came out of the woods that night and tried to get in. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Every mystery begins with a single moment, a single choice, a single step outside into the gathering dusk. And for the Sutton family, that moment came when Billy Ray Taylor decided he needed water from the well. Billy Ray was the kind of man you'd find on any farm in Kentucky, hard-working, practical, not given to flights of fancy. He'd seen his share of strange things in the countryside, unusual animal behavior, odd weather patterns, the kind of phenomena that people who live close to the land learn to accept without question. The well was maybe 50 yards from the house, across the yard, past the old oak tree that had shaded 3 generations of this family. Billy Ray had made this walk thousands of times, in daylight, in darkness, in every season and every kind of weather. It was as familiar to him as breathing. It started with a shimmer. Billy Ray stepped out to fetch water from the well. The screen door closed behind him with that soft slap that speaks of countless summer evenings. He could hear the family inside, the gentle murmur of conversation, a child's laugh, the clink of dishes being cleared. He looked up, as people do when they step outside, checking the sky, reading the weather. The evening was darkening, but not full dark yet. Purple still hung at the edge of the tree line. Stars were just beginning to appear, Venus bright and steady in the western sky. And there it was, a glowing object, silver or orange depending on who tells it. It streaked silently across the sky, moving with purpose, not like a meteor or a plane, but like something under intelligent control, something that knew exactly where it was going. For a moment, Billy Ray just stood there, bucket in hand, watching this impossible thing cross the Kentucky sky. It was beautiful, in a way, almost peaceful, like watching a star fall in slow motion. But there was something about its deliberate movement, something about the way it seemed to pause and choose its direction. Then it dropped behind the trees, not crashing, not falling, but settling, like it was parking in a place that didn't exist 5 seconds ago, like it had found exactly what it was looking for, in the woods behind the Sutton farm. Billy Ray stood there for another moment, trying to process what he'd just seen. The night sounds continued around him, crickets, tree frogs, the distant lowing of cattle. Everything seemed normal. Everything seemed exactly as it should be, except for that feeling, that subtle shift in the air, that sense that something had changed. He looked toward the tree line where the object had disappeared. The woods were dark, impenetrable, full of the usual shadows and shapes that countryside people learn to read like a book. But tonight, something felt different. Tonight, the shadows seemed deeper, more watchful. Billy Ray ran back inside, his boots heavy on the wooden porch, the screen door banging behind him with more force than usual. He found the family just as he'd left them, relaxed, peaceful, unaware that their quiet evening was about to become something else entirely. He said he saw a flying saucer. They laughed. Of course they did. It was 1955. Flying saucers were the stuff of science fiction magazines and B-movies, not something that happened to real people in real places on real Tuesday nights in Kentucky. But their laughter was gentle, the kind that families share, not mocking, just the natural response to an impossible claim. They'd probably ribbed Billy Ray about other things before, his tendency to see faces in clouds, his insistence that the old barn cat could predict weather, the harmless eccentricities that make a person lovable. Someone might have said, "Billy Ray, you've been working too hard." Another might have suggested he'd been sampling the corn liquor. The children giggled, the way children do when adults say something that sounds like a story. But even as they laughed, some part of them filed away the unusual intensity in Billy Ray's voice, the way he stood in the doorway, still holding that empty bucket, still looking back toward the woods. There was something in his manner that didn't quite match the story he was telling, something serious, something shaken. Life has a way of continuing, even after strange things happen. Conversations resumed. Someone put the bucket away. The children were reminded it was getting close to bedtime. The radio continued its soft murmur. Outside, the night sounds played their eternal symphony. But it wasn't long after that when the dogs started barking. Every farm has a dog, and every farm dog has its own way of barking. There's the happy bark for visitors, the warning bark for strangers, the excited bark for squirrels and cats, and then there's the other bark, the one that raises the hair on your arms, the one that says something is wrong. This was that bark, sharp, persistent, with an edge of panic that made everyone in the house stop what they were doing. The children looked up from their games. The adults paused mid-sentence. Someone said, "What's got into that dog?" And then, underneath the barking, they heard something else, something that made the hair on their necks stand up, something that shouldn't have been there. The scratching started. If your mind is wandering right now, that's perfectly okay. Let it drift where it needs to go. And when you're ready, come back to the farmhouse, where the Sutton family is about to experience something that will change their lives forever. Something is approaching through the Kentucky darkness, and it's almost time for the first encounter. Chapter 2, Creatures at the Edge. The first shot rang out just before 9 p.m. Picture that sound if you can, sharp and sudden in the thick summer air, echoing through the woods, bouncing off the shed and the barn, fading somewhere behind the corn. It was the kind of sound that stops time, that makes the very air seem to hold its breath. Inside the house, 11 people froze mid-breath. Children stopped their games. Adults let conversations die in their throats. Someone might have been reaching for a glass of water, another person turning the page of a book, all of it suspended in that moment after the gunshot, when everything changes. Nobody laughed this time. Billy Ray and Lucky Sutton had gone out again. There'd been another sound, a rustle in the underbrush, a shimmer at the edge of vision, something just out of sight, but definitely there, the kind of presence that makes experienced outdoorsmen trust their instincts, even when those instincts are telling them impossible things. Lucky Sutton was the kind of man who knew every sound the Kentucky countryside could make. He'd grown up on this land, had walked these woods since he was old enough to follow his father. He could tell the difference between a raccoon and a possum by their footsteps, could identify birds by their wing beats, could read the land like other people read books. But tonight, the land was speaking a language he didn't recognize. They moved slow, scanning the trees, their eyes adjusting to the darkness. The farmyard was familiar territory. Every building, every fence post, every shadow had its place in their mental map. But tonight, the shadows seemed wrong, deeper, more active. Billy Ray carried a .22 rifle. Lucky had a shotgun, not because they were expecting trouble, but because that's what you did on a farm when you went to investigate strange sounds. It was practical, prudent, the kind of caution that came from living close to the land, where wild animals were a fact of life. The air was still thick with humidity. Insects buzzed around the porch light. Somewhere in the distance, a screech owl called, its voice thin and eerie in the darkness. Everything seemed normal. Everything seemed exactly as it should be, except for that feeling, that growing sense that they were being watched. And then they saw it. Small, 3 feet tall, with a presence that seemed to fill more space than its size should allow. It stood at the edge of the tree line, not hiding, not skulking, just there, as if it had every right to be in this place on this night. Glowing yellow eyes, not reflecting light the way animal eyes do, but generating their own soft luminescence, like tiny lanterns in the darkness, eyes that seemed intelligent, curious, maybe even friendly, if friendship was a concept that applied to something so clearly not of this world. Bat-like ears that twitched and moved, not randomly, but with purpose, as if listening to sounds beyond human hearing, as if receiving information from sources the men couldn't detect. The ears gave it an almost comical appearance, like a child's drawing of an alien, except for those eyes, those impossible, glowing eyes. Arms that hung too long and too thin, reaching almost to the ground, moving with a fluid grace that defied normal anatomy. The proportions were all wrong, unsettling, like looking at a reflection in a funhouse mirror, familiar enough to recognize as humanoid, alien enough to trigger every survival instinct. Skin that shimmered like wet foil or oiled leather, catching and reflecting the starlight in impossible ways. It seemed to shift and change, not quite solid, not quite transparent, as if the creature existed in a state between matter and energy, between here and somewhere else. It floated more than walked, not flying exactly, but not bound by gravity the way earthbound creatures are, moving with the fluid grace of something underwater, or something freed from the normal rules of physics. It was beautiful in its way, and terrible, and completely impossible. The creature raised its hands, those impossibly long, thin hands, maybe in peace, maybe in warning, maybe in greeting. The gesture was somehow both alien and familiar, like a distant echo of human behavior, translated through an intelligence that understood the form but not the meaning. For a moment the three beings, two human, one not, simply regarded each other across the Kentucky farmyard. In that suspended instant, anything might have happened. Communication, understanding, a peaceful first contact that would change the world. But fear, that ancient primal fear of the unknown, made the choice instead. They fired. The sound shattered the night. Birds exploded from trees. Dogs began barking across the countryside. Inside the house, women screamed, children cried. The peaceful summer evening dissolved into chaos and terror. The creature flipped backward, like a doll, like something without weight or substance, but not the way a living thing falls when shot. This was different, controlled, almost graceful, as if the gunshot was merely an inconvenience, a rude interruption to whatever it had been trying to accomplish. It vanished into the dark, not running, not limping, not bleeding, simply gone, absorbed back into the shadows as if it had never been there at all, leaving the two men to wonder if they had imagined the whole thing, if the stress and strangeness of the evening had finally gotten to them. No cry, no body, no blood on the ground where it had stood, nothing to prove that the encounter had really happened, except for the echo of gunshots and the certainty in their hearts that something impossible had just occurred. They stood there for a moment, breathing hard, hearts pounding, waiting for their night vision to return, listening for any sound that might indicate where the creature had gone. But the night had fallen silent. Even the insects had stopped their chorus, as if all of nature was holding its breath. Then another came. This one was different, bolder. It approached the house itself, moving with that same impossible floating gait, but with more purpose, more determination. It positioned itself at one of the windows and simply watched. Inside the house, someone screamed, a child's voice, high and terrified. "There's something at the window." And there it was, that same small figure, those same glowing eyes, pressed against the glass like a curious child, but wrong, all wrong. Lucky fired through the screen. The blast destroyed the window screen, shattered glass, sent everyone in the house diving for cover. But the creature, it just backed away without falling, without apparent injury, moving with that same fluid grace, as if bullets were merely an annoyance. It didn't flee in panic the way an animal would. It didn't collapse the way anything made of flesh and blood should. It simply withdrew, floating backward into the darkness, those yellow eyes never blinking, never losing their curious, almost friendly expression. Inside, the house filled with panic, 11 people, 3 generations of a family, suddenly thrust into a nightmare they had no framework for understanding. Children cried, adults shouted instructions. Everyone moved at once, and no one knew what to do. More faces at more windows. The creatures seemed to be everywhere, surrounding the house, studying it, studying them. They moved with coordination, with purpose, as if this was not a random encounter but a planned investigation, as if the Sutton family had become subjects in some incomprehensible experiment. Movement on the roof, the sound of something light but substantial walking across the shingles, directly over their heads, back and forth, as if mapping the interior, or searching for a way in. The children huddled against their parents, eyes wide with terror, as the sounds moved from room to room above them. Clawing at the doors, gentle but persistent, not the frantic scrabbling of an animal, but the methodical exploration of an intelligence trying to understand how human dwellings worked, how they opened, how they might be entered. The sounds were almost polite, if politeness could be attributed to something so utterly alien. The Suttons fired round after round, shotgun blasts, rifle cracks, the sound of breaking glass, splintering wood, but nothing bled, nothing screamed, nothing ever stayed down. The creatures seemed immune to human weapons, or perhaps existed in a state where physical harm simply didn't apply. At one point, Billy Ray made the mistake of opening the front door, perhaps to get a better shot, perhaps to see if the coast was clear. The door swung open, and there, hanging upside down from the roof overhang, was one of the creatures. A clawed hand reached down, long fingers ending in what might have been talons, and brushed Billy Ray's hair, gently, almost tenderly, like a parent checking on a sleeping child. The touch was neither hot nor cold, neither rough nor smooth, but something else entirely, something that made Billy Ray's skin crawl and his soul recoil. He slammed the door shut and backed away, shaking, unable to speak for several minutes. That touch, that impossible, gentle touch, would haunt him for the rest of his life. Proof that whatever these things were, they were real, they were here, and they were interested in the people inside this house. Something was playing with them, and it wasn't in a hurry. Take a moment, if you need to let your mind process this strangeness. If you find yourself drifting, that's perfectly natural. The human mind has ways of protecting itself from things too strange to fully comprehend. When you're ready, we'll continue with our story. There's still much more to unfold on this impossible night in Kentucky. Chapter 3, A Night Under Siege. From about 9 p.m. to after midnight, the Sutton house was under siege. Imagine, if you can, being trapped in your own home, surrounded by something that defied explanation, hour after hour, as the normal world outside continued its peaceful existence, unaware that reality had taken a sharp left turn in one small corner of Kentucky. They fired shotguns and .22 rifles at creatures peeking in windows, creeping along the roof, hovering near the tree line. The house became a fortress, every window a potential breach, every door a weak point that needed constant guarding. The family organized themselves by instinct, adults taking positions, children staying low and quiet. Lucky Sutton moved from window to window, checking sight lines, counting ammunition, trying to make sense of an enemy that followed no earthly rules. He was a veteran, had seen combat, knew how to stay calm under fire. But this was different. This was like fighting shadows, like battling something from a dream. They described up to a dozen beings, but never more than 2 or 3 at a time. They came in waves, one near the back door, another crouched near the barn, then nothing, then one perched on the roof, tapping softly on the shingles, as if knocking, as if asking permission to enter. The pattern was almost ritualistic, methodical. as if the creatures were following some protocol that made sense to them but remained completely alien to human understanding. They would appear, allow themselves to be seen, sometimes shot at, then withdraw, only to reappear elsewhere, continuing their strange investigation. No sounds, no language, just silent movement. The creatures never spoke, never called to each other, never made any noise except for the soft scraping of claws on wood, the gentle tap of feet on roof shingles. They communicated, if they communicated at all, through means beyond human perception. Inside, the children huddled near the floor, wide-eyed, clutching toys and blankets, trying to make sense of a world that had suddenly become incomprehensible. The adults tried to maintain calm, to project strength and control, but their voices carried an edge of hysteria, of people pushed beyond their limits. The adults reloaded by lantern light, their hands shaking slightly, brass cartridges clicking against each other. The familiar ritual of loading shells, checking chambers, provided some comfort, some sense of control in a situation that had spiraled far beyond anyone's ability to manage. They would hear something scrape the wall, then fire. The blast would illuminate the yard for a split second, revealing shadows, shapes, sometimes the glowing eyes of something watching from the darkness, then silence again, then the gradual realization that whatever they had shot at was still there, still watching, still waiting. One of the creatures was seen crouched under the overhang of the roof, positioned where it could see into the living room window. It sat there for long minutes, studying the people inside with the patience of a scientist observing laboratory specimens. Those yellow eyes never blinked, never wavered, never showed any emotion that humans could recognize. When they shot at it, it floated backward into the air, not jumping, not falling, but moving with the graceful weightlessness of something under water. It drifted away into the woods like a leaf on a gentle breeze, but wrong, all wrong, because leaves don't choose their direction, and this thing clearly did. Not running, floating, as if gravity didn't fully apply, as if the land was something borrowed, as if these beings existed in a state between worlds, subject to some laws of physics but not others, anchored to reality but not imprisoned by it. The siege continued with an almost leisurely pace. The creatures never seemed rushed, never appeared panicked by the gunfire. They went about their business, whatever that business was, with the calm efficiency of professionals doing a job they understood, even if that job remained completely mysterious to the humans they were studying. Sometimes there would be long periods of silence when the family would begin to hope that maybe it was over, maybe the creatures had lost interest and moved on. They would start to relax, to whisper among themselves, to comfort the children, to pretend that normal life might resume. Then, just as they began to let their guard down, the soft tapping would resume, or a shadow would pass by a window, or those glowing eyes would appear at the edge of the porch light, reminding them that their visitors were still there, still watching, still conducting their inexplicable research. The psychological toll was immense, hour after hour of hypervigilance, of jumping at every sound, of trying to protect family members from something that couldn't be hurt, couldn't be driven away, couldn't be reasoned with. It was like being trapped in a nightmare that refused to end. But perhaps the most unsettling aspect was the creatures' behavior. They weren't aggressive in any conventional sense. They never tried to break down doors, never attempted to harm anyone. They seemed curious, investigative, almost gentle in their alien way, as if violence was simply not part of their nature or their mission. This somehow made it worse. An attacking enemy could be understood, could be fought, could be driven off, but beings that studied you with the detached interest of scientists, that treated your terror as irrelevant data, that continued their work regardless of your resistance, that was profoundly disturbing in a way that simple aggression never could be. The night stretched on, each hour feeling like a lifetime. The family took turns at the windows, watching, waiting, trying to anticipate where the next sighting would occur. The creatures seemed to understand human behavior well enough to stay unpredictable, to appear where they weren't expected, to maintain the element of surprise. If you're feeling drowsy, that's perfectly okay. Let yourself drift along with this story. Your breathing can slow, your body can relax, even as we explore these strange events. Remember, this is a story, a mystery from long ago, wrapped in the safe cocoon of time and distance. Nothing can hurt you here, in this peaceful space we share. Chapter 4. The Goblins Leave No Trace. Just after midnight, the creatures disappeared, not all at once, but gradually, like fog burning off under a slow sun, like shadows retreating before the dawn, though dawn was still hours away. The departure was as mysterious as everything else about that night. There was no signal that the humans could detect, no apparent reason for the timing. The creatures simply withdrew, melting back into the darkness from which they had emerged, leaving the Sutton family to wonder if it had all been real, or if they had somehow shared a collective hallucination. For perhaps half an hour, the house was silent. The family remained at their posts, afraid to believe it was over, afraid to let down their guard. They whispered among themselves, comparing notes, trying to make sense of what they had experienced. But how do you make sense of the impossible? The children had long since fallen asleep, exhausted by fear and adrenaline, curled up on the floor where their parents had told them to lie down, their innocent faces peaceful in sleep, unaware that they had witnessed something that would puzzle investigators for decades to come. Around 2 a.m., the Suttons made a break for it. All 11 of them, 3 generations of a family, fled their own home, loaded into 2 vehicles, and drove through the night to the Hopkinsville police station. Picture that scene, if you can. Children in pajamas, dragged from sleep and bundled into cars. Adults shaking with exhaustion and shock, everyone talking at once or sitting in stunned silence. The normal world passing by the windows, street lights and stop signs and all the ordinary fixtures of civilization, as if nothing had changed, as if reality was still intact. They weren't drunk, they weren't laughing, they weren't looking for attention or publicity. They were scared, genuinely, deeply scared, in the way that only people who have encountered something beyond their understanding can be. This wasn't the fear of known dangers, but the much deeper terror of having your entire worldview called into question. The police station was quiet at 2 a.m. A desk sergeant, maybe one patrol officer, the usual collection of night shift personnel who were used to dealing with domestic disputes, drunk drivers, petty crimes, not alien encounters, not impossible stories from respectable farm families. But something about the Suttons' manner, their obvious sincerity, their detailed, consistent accounts, convinced the authorities to take them seriously. Within the hour, local police, state troopers, and soldiers from nearby Fort Campbell were on site at the farmhouse. The investigators came prepared for anything: floodlights, cameras, measuring equipment, weapons. They approached the farmhouse like a crime scene, which, in a way, it was the scene of something that challenged everything they thought they knew about the world. They found bullet holes, lots of them, peppering the walls, the window frames, the porch posts, evidence of a sustained firefight, of people defending their home against something they perceived as a real threat. The damage was extensive, expensive, not the kind of thing anyone would fake for a practical joke. Broken glass littered the ground, shattered windows, destroyed screens. The physical evidence was overwhelming. Something had definitely happened here. Some kind of confrontation had taken place. But confrontation with what? Torn screens hung in tatters, as if something with claws had tested them, explored them, tried to understand how they worked. The damage was precise, almost surgical, not the random destruction of vandalism or animal attack, but the methodical investigation of intelligence trying to solve a puzzle. Shotgun shells scattered like dry corn across the yard, brass cartridges gleaming in the searchlights, each one representing a moment of terror, a decision to shoot at something that shouldn't exist. Evidence of a battle fought against an impossible enemy. But no blood, no footprints, no hair, no burn marks, no craft in the field. The investigators combed every inch of the property, searching for any physical evidence that might explain what had happened. But the creatures, whatever they were, had left no trace of their passage. Just silence, just dew. The Kentucky countryside had returned to its normal rhythm: crickets singing, tree frogs calling, night birds hunting in the darkness, as if nothing extraordinary had ever happened, as if the universe had simply reset erasing all evidence of its temporary suspension of natural law. The investigators were thorough, professional. They measured, photographed, took samples of soil and vegetation. They interviewed each family member separately, looking for inconsistencies, contradictions, any sign that this was an elaborate hoax, but the stories matched. The details were consistent. The physical evidence was real. The family returned after the search ended, exhausted, emotionally drained, but somehow relieved to have their story taken seriously, to have official recognition that something had indeed occurred. They gathered their belongings, checked on the children, tried to settle back into their disrupted home. By 3:30 a.m., with the investigators gone, with the official business concluded, with the world returning to normal, the creatures came back. More tapping on windows, soft, rhythmic, patient, like someone knocking on a door, waiting politely to be invited in, the sound that had terrorized them for hours, returning as if nothing had changed, as if the presence of authorities meant nothing to these beings. More movement on the roof, the gentle scraping of something light but substantial, walking back and forth above their heads, investigating, exploring, continuing the mysterious work that had been interrupted but not abandoned. The creatures had simply waited with infinite patience for the humans to finish their incomprehensible rituals. They didn't fire this time. What was the point? They had learned that bullets were useless, that resistance was futile, that these beings operated according to rules that had nothing to do with human understanding. All they could do was wait and endure and hope that dawn would bring an end to this nightmare. They just waited for the sun, huddled together in their own home, made strangers in their own lives, counting the minutes until daylight would restore some semblance of normality, some sense that the world still made sense, that the laws of physics still applied, that they were still safe in their own reality. The sounds continued until dawn, soft, persistent, methodical, like researchers completing a study, like scientists gathering the last bits of data before concluding their experiment. The family listened, powerless to stop it, powerless to understand it, powerless to do anything but survive it. When the first rays of sunlight crept across the Kentucky farmland, the sound stopped. The presence that had surrounded their house for nearly 8 hours simply vanished, absorbed back into whatever dimension it had emerged from, leaving the Sutton family to face a new day and a lifetime of questions. If you find your thoughts drifting now, that's perfectly natural. The mind needs time to process strangeness, to find ways of filing away experiences that don't fit our normal categories. Let yourself float with these thoughts, and when you're ready, we'll explore what happened next, how the world reacted to the Sutton family's impossible night. Chapter 5, When the Authorities Arrive. The next day, the story spread fast, faster than the family had expected, faster than they wanted, like wildfire through the rural communities of Christian County and beyond. The Hopkinsville Goblins. That's what the newspapers called them. Little green men, space invaders. The headlines wrote themselves, with the kind of sensationalism that sells papers but destroys lives, turning a family's terrifying experience into entertainment for the masses. The local press ran headlines with winks and jabs. Martians visit Hopkinsville. Little men from space terrorize farm family. The tone was mocking, dismissive, designed to generate chuckles rather than serious consideration. The kind of coverage that makes people laugh and makes witnesses regret ever speaking up. People came to gawk, carloads of curiosity seekers driving out from town to see the flying saucer house, pointing, staring, taking pictures, treating the Sutton farm like a roadside attraction, like a tourist destination. The family's private trauma became public spectacle. The Suttons locked the gate and posted no trespassing signs. They didn't want attention. They didn't want fame. They didn't want to be the center of a media circus. They wanted answers. They wanted understanding. They wanted their quiet life back. But that was no longer possible. Lucky Sutton had to take time off work to deal with reporters, journalists from Louisville, from Nashville, even from national publications, all wanting the same story, all asking the same questions, all approaching the encounter with the same mixture of fascination and skepticism. The children couldn't go to school without being stared at, whispered about, asked endless questions by classmates who had heard wild versions of the story. Their normal childhood was over, replaced by a lifetime of being those kids from the flying saucer house, a burden they never asked for and couldn't escape. Project Blue Book, the Air Force's public-facing UFO investigation program, was aware of the incident. Files were kept, reports were written, but no formal investigation was ever announced. No official conclusions were ever released. The case simply disappeared into the bureaucratic maze of classified projects and buried reports. Though Fort Campbell confirmed soldiers were dispatched, the military response was real, immediate, thorough, suggesting that someone in authority took the report seriously, that the incident was considered significant enough to warrant investigation by trained personnel. But the results of that investigation were never made public. Some said it was a hoax, the easiest explanation, the most comfortable conclusion. If the Suttons had made it up, if they had staged the whole thing, then the world still made sense, then the laws of physics were still intact, then ordinary people didn't have to worry about impossible visitors in the night. Others said it was owls, great horned owls, defending territory, their eyes reflecting artificial light, creating the illusion of glowing, their unusual behavior explained by some environmental factor, migration patterns, mating season, disease, anything that could provide a rational explanation for irrational events. But the family stood by their story. Through decades of ridicule, through waves of publicity, through the skepticism of experts and the mockery of neighbors, they never wavered, never changed their account, never admitted to making it up. Their consistency was either remarkable dedication to a lie or unwavering commitment to an impossible truth. Lucky Sutton gave interviews for years, always telling the same story, with the same details, the same emotional weight. He would describe those glowing eyes, that floating movement, the touch of clawed fingers on Billy Ray's hair. His voice would carry the same conviction, the same bewilderment, the same pain of not being believed. Decades later, and when the jokes faded, when UFO stories became cable specials and late-night talk fodder, when the culture had shifted to be more accepting of the unexplained, the Sutton children, now grown, with children and grandchildren of their own, still said the same thing. We saw something that night, and it was real. Their voices carried the weight of lives shaped by one impossible evening, of decades spent defending a truth that the world wasn't ready to accept, of the burden of witnessing something that challenged everything humanity thought it knew about its place in the universe. Take a moment to rest here, to let your mind settle with these thoughts, the weight of truth, the burden of witnessing, the loneliness of seeing something that others cannot or will not accept. When you're ready, we'll explore the various explanations, the theories, the ongoing mystery of what really happened that night in Kentucky. Chapter 6. Owls, Lies, or Visitors. The skeptical explanation goes like this, and it's worth considering, because truth is often stranger and more complex than either believers or skeptics want to admit. A meteor was seen that evening across parts of the Midwest. Multiple witnesses, documented sightings, atmospheric phenomena that could account for Billy Ray's initial observation. The Perseid meteor shower was active, creating unusual lighting effects, natural fireworks that might explain the flying saucer that started it all. Maybe that's what Billy Ray saw, a particularly bright meteor, its trajectory creating the illusion of controlled flight, its descent behind the trees coinciding with the natural end of its visible path. No aliens, no spacecraft, just cosmic debris burning up in Earth's atmosphere, beautiful, mysterious, but entirely natural. Great horned owls are territorial, especially during breeding season. Their eyes glow yellow in the dark, reflecting even minimal light sources, creating an eerie luminescence that can be startling to the unprepared. They're large birds, powerful, capable of unusual behavior when defending their territory. Maybe that's what was shot at. Aggressive owls, protecting their nesting area, their eyes creating the illusion of alien visitors, their silent flight, their ability to appear and disappear, their fierce territorial instincts, all combining to create a terrifying but entirely terrestrial encounter. But owls don't float backward when shot. They don't tap windows for hours. They don't drift toward houses in groups. They don't coordinate their movements with the precision that the Suttons described. And they sure as hell don't brush a man's hair from the roof with gentle, clawed fingers. The owl theory, while logical, while comforting, while scientifically acceptable, simply doesn't account for the full range of behaviors described by the witnesses. It explains some elements, but fails to address the most puzzling aspects: the intelligence, the coordination, the apparent technological superiority. Some say it was mass hysteria, a mix of poor lighting, rural nerves, and suggestion. One person sees something unusual, describes it to others, and suddenly everyone is seeing the same impossible thing. The power of collective belief, creating a shared delusion that feels completely real to those experiencing it. Psychologists have documented cases of mass hysteria, entire communities experiencing similar symptoms, seeing similar phenomena, sharing similar delusions. The human mind is remarkably susceptible to suggestion, especially under stress, especially in groups, especially when dealing with the unknown. But mass hysteria doesn't create physical evidence, doesn't fire guns, doesn't leave bullet holes, doesn't damage property. The Sutton encounter left behind concrete proof that something had occurred, something that required real physical responses from real physical people. Others say it wasn't from outer space at all, but from somewhere underneath, from the hollow spaces beneath the Kentucky hills, from cavern systems that connect to deeper realms, from the spaces between spaces where reality wears thin, and other kinds of intelligence occasionally, accidentally, break through. The case inspired later theories of ultra-terrestrials, beings not from another planet, but from another layer of reality, creatures that exist in the same space we do, but at a different frequency, a different vibrational rate, normally invisible to us, but occasionally, under the right conditions, able to manifest in our reality. Ultra-terrestrials, creatures that seep through the cracks when we aren't watching, when the sky is low, when the air is wet, when the wrong sound scrapes the screen door, when the boundary between worlds becomes permeable, allowing things to slip through that have no business being here. This theory accounts for the creature's apparent indifference to physical laws, their immunity to bullets, their ability to appear and disappear, their strange, almost experimental behavior. They weren't visiting from space, they were visiting from next door, from a reality that overlaps ours, but operates by different rules. This story resurfaced years later in a quiet, winding documentary called Hellier. Same creatures, same state, same feeling that something wants to be seen. The Kentucky hills, it seems, have always been home to things that don't quite fit our understanding of what's possible. Not understood, just seen. The creatures in the Hellier case displayed similar characteristics, similar behavior patterns, similar indifference to human attempts at communication or control, as if Kentucky sits on some kind of dimensional fault line where realities occasionally, briefly, overlap. The Hellier researchers found patterns, connections, similarities that stretched across decades, across counties, across generations of witnesses, all describing encounters with small, intelligent, apparently technological beings that seemed more interested in observation than interaction, more curious than hostile. Perhaps the Sutton encounter wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a larger, ongoing phenomenon, a pattern of contact that has been happening for years, decades, possibly centuries, in the hills and hollows of Kentucky, largely ignored by mainstream science, dismissed by official channels, but documented by those brave enough to report the impossible. Let your mind drift with these possibilities, these theories and explanations, each one offering a different lens through which to view the mystery, none of them complete, none of them fully satisfying, but all of them pointing toward the same conclusion, that our understanding of reality, of what's possible, of what shares this world with us, may be far more limited than we like to believe. Chapter 7. Why the Goblins Still Matter. You can laugh if you want. The world's full of stories. Some make the paper, some stay on porches, whispered between generations, passed down like family recipes or warnings about dangerous roads, stories that carry truth even when that truth doesn't fit into neat categories. But the Hopkinsville story remains because no one ever truly explained it, no theory, no investigation, no official conclusion ever fully accounted for all the evidence, all the witnesses, all the physical proof that something extraordinary occurred on that August night in 1955. And the witnesses never truly forgot it. How could they? When you've seen something that challenges everything you thought you knew about the world, when you've touched the edge of a reality larger and stranger than anything you were prepared for, that experience changes you, permanently, irrevocably. It didn't make them famous, not in any positive sense. Fame implies admiration, respect, celebration. What the Suttons received was notoriety, ridicule, the kind of attention that makes people wish they had never spoken up, never reported what they saw, never tried to share their impossible truth. It didn't make them rich. There were no book deals, no movie rights, no lucrative speaking engagements. The Suttons were working-class people, farmers and laborers, who gained nothing material from their encounter, who had every incentive to recant, to admit it was a hoax, to make the attention go away, but never did. It made them tired of defending themselves, tired of being disbelieved. tired of being the family that claimed to have met aliens. They carried the weight of their experience for decades, the burden of being witnesses to something that the world wasn't ready to accept. And it made them feel like we aren't the ones watching, not all the time, not exclusively. Sometimes, more often than we like to think, something else watches us, quietly, without fear, without sound, with the patient curiosity of intelligence studying something it doesn't quite understand. This is perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the Hopkinsville encounter. Not the creatures themselves, not their strange appearance or impossible abilities, but the implication that we are not alone, not unique, not the apex intelligence we assume ourselves to be, that we are possibly subjects of study, specimens being observed, catalogued, analyzed. Sometimes it taps the window to remind us the world is thinner than we think, the boundaries between realities are more porous than we assume, the universe is stranger, more populated, more active than our science has yet discovered, and occasionally, very occasionally, something breaks through to remind us of our true place in the cosmic order. And sometimes it knocks, just to see if we'll answer, just to test our reactions, to gauge our responses, to add another data point to whatever vast study we've unknowingly become part of. The gentle tapping on windows, the soft scraping on roofs, the patient watching from the darkness, all part of an investigation that we don't understand and can't control. Just to see if we'll answer. But what would we say? How do you communicate with intelligence that operates by rules you don't understand? How do you establish contact with beings whose motives remain completely opaque? How do you even begin to bridge a gap that vast, that fundamental? The Suttons never tried to communicate. Fear prevented that. The primal terror of encountering something so utterly alien that every instinct screamed danger. But what if they had tried? What if someone had opened the door, laid down their weapons, attempted conversation? Would we know more? Would we understand better? Or would we simply have confirmed our status as subjects rather than equals? These questions haunt the case, the missed opportunities, the roads not taken, the possibility that August night in 1955 could have been humanity's first documented contact with non-human intelligence. If only fear hadn't intervened, if only we had been prepared, if only we had been ready to accept that we might not be alone. But perhaps that's too much to ask. Perhaps the Suttons responded exactly as any of us would have, with fear, with confusion, with the desperate need to protect their family from something beyond their understanding. Perhaps their reaction was perfectly human, perfectly normal, perfectly understandable. And perhaps that reaction, that very human response to the impossible, is itself significant. Perhaps it tells us something about ourselves, about our limitation, about our readiness, or lack thereof, to take our place in a larger, stranger, more populated universe. The Hopkinsville case remains unsolved, unexplained, officially ignored but unofficially studied, dismissed by mainstream science but embraced by those who understand that reality is larger, stranger, more flexible than our textbooks suggest. It stands as a reminder that the universe is still full of mysteries, still capable of surprising us, still home to intelligence that we haven't yet learned to recognize. As our story draws to a close, take a moment to consider your own place in this vast, mysterious cosmos. You are part of something larger than yourself, something stranger than you know, something more wonderful than you can imagine. And sometimes, just sometimes, that something wonderful notices you noticing it and taps gently on the window of your awareness. If you find yourself drifting towards sleep now, that's perfectly natural. Let these thoughts carry you gently toward rest, toward dreams, toward the peaceful darkness where all mysteries eventually find their resolution. The story is complete, but the mystery continues, as it always has, as it always will. Peaceful closing. Our journey through this strange, wonderful, unsettling tale is nearly complete. We've followed the Sutton family through their impossible night, explored the various explanations, considered the ongoing mysteries, and perhaps discovered that the universe is far stranger and more wonderful than we usually allow ourselves to believe. How are you feeling now? Hopefully peaceful, relaxed, ready to let sleep carry you away from questions without answers, away from mysteries without solutions, into the gentle darkness where all things find their rest, where the impossible becomes possible, where the strange becomes familiar, where all boundaries dissolve into dreams. As you prepare for sleep tonight, remember that you are part of this same mysterious universe, connected to the same cosmic web that includes farmhouses in Kentucky, glowing-eyed visitors, patient watchers in the darkness, and sleeping minds that dream of contact, of connection, of understanding across the vast distances between different kinds of consciousness. Your breath can slow like evening settling over the countryside. Your thoughts can quiet like creatures withdrawing into the forest. Your body can relax like tension leaving the Sutton house when dawn finally came. Everything can be peaceful. Everything can find its natural rhythm. Everything can rest. There's nothing to fear in these mysteries, nothing to worry about in these unsolved puzzles. They are simply reminders that the universe is larger, stranger, more wonderful than we usually remember. And that's a comforting thought, not a frightening one, because it means there's always more to discover, always new wonders waiting, always new possibilities opening before us. Feel yourself floating now on the gentle current of this story, carried by the rhythm of mystery and wonder toward shores of peaceful sleep, where all questions find their rest, where all puzzles become dreams, where all visitors are welcome and all watchers are friends. May your dreams be filled with gentle mysteries, with wonder rather than fear, with curiosity rather than anxiety. May you rest in the knowledge that you are part of something vast and beautiful, something that includes farmhouses and flying saucers, Kentucky countryside and cosmic visitors, ordinary people and extraordinary possibilities. Sleep well, dream peacefully, and remember that sometimes, just sometimes, the impossible taps gently on the window of our awareness, not to frighten us, but to remind us that the universe is far more wonderful than we dare to imagine. Rest now in the gentle mystery of sleep, where all stories find their ending and all dreams find their beginning.